paper at the end of this month. So I was thinking I might talk about that for a few minutes, maybe give some advice or pointers, or people could ask questions. But if no one's interested, I'll just move back into the lectures and the information. So let me know. What do you think? What do you? I see some people nodding their heads, but I can't tell if it's a majority of people. You do a voice vote. All in favor? Huh? I should? Thank you, Ms. Whalen. I appreciate that. Okay. All right, I will, because I think it's in my better judgment. My better judgment is telling me I should. Because when I was going through school, except for one English teacher in high school, I had to write a paper for, and that's when I kind of learned how to do footnotes and stuff like that. That was it, throughout college and even into graduate school. No one told me how to write a paper, you know. The only professor who really mentioned something was like, well, look at Turabian, kind of like I say to you, look at the syllabus. But Kate Turabian, who's, she's long dead, but basically the Chicago Manual of Style. Look at the Chicago Manual of Style, and that'll tell you how to write. All right. I didn't, but well, no, I shouldn't say that. I perused it, but I didn't. But over years, I learned it. Anywho, all right. So the paper is due the end of this month. What is the basic thing for any paper? Any paper that you write in any of your courses. Okay, there are a few things that you should know that are generally acceptable. You should always look at the syllabus to see if perhaps your professor has given specific requirements. But what I'm telling you is pretty general and pretty acceptable for most courses, whether it's the arts or the sciences. Obviously, you got to identify yourself. Put your full name, no nicknames, your full name, okay? No abbreviations, okay? Because the professor might not know that, I don't know, ASCII is an abbreviation for Azarea or something. I'm just using that as an example, you know? Might not know that. Might know your last name, fine, but doesn't necessarily know who your first name is. You just want to be careful. When you identify your full name, the course that you're in, and what the assignment is. Okay, those three basic pieces of information are kind of necessary. They help the professor out, so he doesn't have to figure out or she doesn't have to figure out. All right, I'm teaching 4 different courses, or maybe 5 this semester. Which one is this person in? Shouldn't you know? Well, yeah, but when you've got a couple hundred students, it helps. You know what I'm saying? Helps to know which course specifically you're in, and then to know which assignment you're doing. Okay, because there might be multiple assignments that the professor's given out. It's like they need to know. So identify yourself. Double space. That's a big one. That was a godsend for me because I was in the seminary, you know, doing my Master of Divinity. Because priests have to get a Master of Divinity. Now it's going to be a priest. Master of Divinity is just a professional degree. Right? Ministers get them, priests get them, clergy. I don't know why. I mean, they want the clergy to know something before they go out and do some real damage. That's it. So I was doing my master's degree, and then I did a master of arts, to a master's of arts when I was out of the seminary. And I just always assumed single space. So I have a professor, I look at the syllabus, 12-page paper on such and such a topic or whatever, or choose a topic, right? So I'm writing a 12-page paper, single space, right? And then one day I was complaining to one of my fellow seminarians. I'm like, this is killing me. This is so much work. He's like, well, what are you doing? I told him how I was doing it. He's like, Matt, are you crazy? You don't have to do a single space. The standard is double spaced. And it's like the light parted. It's like Moses in the Red Sea. The waters parted before him. Hallelujah. Yep. Because no one had ever told me. None of my teachers told me. No one just never came up. I just assumed that you were doing it single space. But no, the standard is double space. And obviously, with double space, you're not writing as much, which is nice. No, I'm not going to lie. Yeah, it was nice to know that my paper that I was talking to my friend about had just been cut in half. Yeah. And font. There are two fonts you can choose from. Times New Roman or Courier New. I guess these are the traditional choices. I also think nowadays, with all the concern about people with learning disabilities and stuff like that, I think Arial's might also be an option. It's easier. Times New Roman, I think, from what I've heard, can be difficult for people who are, I guess, on the spectrum or whatever, have learning disabilities to read. Okay, so you should opt for the Arial. I don't know if Courier New has the same issue as Times New Roman does, but these are the traditional standards. And just for a little bit of, information, Courier New is a little bit of a bigger font. So I was always opting for Courier New. Not anymore, though. I mean, for me, it looks ugly. Now that I look back at my old papers, they look ugly in Courier New. But I wanted to get them done, and if it could save me, I don't know, half a page because of the font size, or if you're going to write a book or something, then they'll probably tell you only use Courier or Times New Roman. Anyways, so these are your font choices. Um, what else is coming to my mind? Anything more important? 1-inch margins. Yes, 1-inch margins. That's typical. No more, no less. Okay, 1-inch margins. And then, yeah, this is pretty standard for any paper you're going to write for, whether it's one of your science classes or one of your arts classes. And things, for me, for our paper, okay, if you've read the syllabus, I basically don't set any more requirements than basically identifying information and a word count, yeah? I mean, the rest of this I'm not too concerned about. I'm just giving you this information because no one ever seems to tell anybody about it. Just have to kind of, I guess, figure it out for yourself, if ever. And I happened to stumble upon it because a friend told me. And then I did start looking into it in the Chicago Manual style. I'm like, yeah, what should I be doing here? What are they holding me to? Because no professor said, hey, Matt, this is a great paper, but it's like, you wrote 30 pages when you could have written 15 in double speed. Now, so for our paper, I go by a word count because I think it's better than page numbers. I could give page numbers, but I just think that there's too much, let's say, finagling, Ms. Goldie, that can go on with that. Like maybe one person. Like I noticed that all of his apostrophes and quotation marks were really large. Larger, not significantly large, but large, noticeably large. And I looked at the paper and I looked at the formatting and I'm like, yeah, the font size of the type is 12-point font, but it's like 1225 for like all the apostrophes. It just doesn't happen. I mean, I know Word can have glitches, but it's a little too consistent. So people can play around with fonts. I know all this stuff. I've been writing since I was a kid on my typewriter, and I've been writing on computers and doing stuff for ages. So, it's like the saying goes, and I'll expurgate it. Don't kid a kid it, because I know the tricks too, because I've used them, not often, but I know what can be done. And so it just doesn't make any so page number. Just make it words. How many words do you use? Which is easier. You can still kind of finagle the words as well, but I'm not as concerned about that. All right. 800 words. If you're curious, it works out to like 2 pages if you're curious. So if you write 2 pages of single space. Now, for formatting and all the rest of it, I'm not that concerned about formatting. The main thing with formatting for me is consistency. If you're going to do a double spaced, be consistent. Don't give me one paragraph that's double spaced and another paragraph that's single spaced. Or if you just want to do it all single spaced, that's easier for you, or you have a lot to say and you want to fit it in. Don't do some parts double spaced because it gets confusing to the reader, which is me. Okay, and you have to and think about the reader when you write all of your papers, not just this, but when you do your work for your classes. Take some time to look at it from the perspective of the reader. And if you're looking at it and you're reading it, say to yourself, if I didn't know, I'm not the writer of this, I'm just the reader, would I know what the writer is talking about? Would this make sense to me? Would I read something and be like, well, what is this? You mentioned such and such, but you never explain what it is, you just assume that the reader's going to know. And yeah, I've got a PhD in Catholic theology. Kind of a minor biblical study, I guess you could say. It's interdisciplinary. Because the Bible people and theology people don't talk. They don't know what to do with each other. Anyways, but I love the Bible too. I love theology. So you're going to think, oh yeah, of course Dr. Dunn's going to know what I'm talking about. I probably will. But that's not the point. You're not writing, we're not, you have to show me what you know and that you can explain it. If you're going to bring up like the Markan secret, everybody will, because artificial intelligence can't figure out that it was just a theory, of one guy, it always seems to show up. You can't assume that I know what you're talking about. You have to explain it. Think about the reader who's reading, and don't assume that the reader knows what you're talking about. For a lot of stuff. I mean, general things that people ought to know, you don't have to explain. All right. Like AD, if you use AD or BC, or BCE or CE, that's common enough, at least in scholarly writing or academic writing, that you shouldn't have to, even make a footnote to explain to the reader, oh, this is what it means, It's obvious. You don't have to explain to me necessarily who Jesus is. All right, that's, I mean, you have to be commonsensical about it. Okay, but if you're mentioning things from the Gospel of Mark, like in the story, like Jesus goes here and does this, and you leave out all sorts of details because you think, well, Dr. Dunn's read the Gospel of Mark, and he should know this. Well, yeah, I probably do. But would another reader know what you're talking about if he or she had not ever read the Gospel of Mark? Explain it to that reader. All right? You know because you've read it. Me. But assume that the reader has not. Okay? For sources, so I'm not that concerned. I'm not going to mention that. For sources, and like people are, because there are all sorts of different styles of citing information. Okay? A number of you I know are like in the health sciences, radiology, or you're doing nursing or something, or social work or something like that. And they usually prefer what's called internal citation. As you've seen this where, within some parentheses, there's the name of the author of a book and the page number. Have you seen this? That, well, I know you don't have to write the paper, but God bless you. What page number do we want? Page 15. That's just have you seen this before? Have you done this before in your paper? Okay. Usually, at least the way I learn it, and I know some of the information I'm giving to you might be dated. Okay, so just also take that into account. I apologize if it is. because I haven't kept up on every edition of the AD, American Psychological Association, or the MLA, the Modern Language Association. But I know enough. In some forms they want you with internal citations still to give the publishing date of publication for the book. So you might see, Smith 2026, page 15. All right. Usually, as I was taught, you only need to give a date of publication if you're citing more than one book from someone with the same last name. So if you're citing 3 books from someone named Smith, then to help the reader out again, not confuse them, and say, okay, this is from 2026, this is from 1999, this is from, okay, so you know what the person's talking about. But internal citation is, for this kind of work, is the easiest. If you're ever writing a book or writing something more, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I would recommend footnotes, just because internal citation can get sloppy, look sloppy, especially if you're going to cite a lot of things. Like you're going to cite 2 or 3 books as a source and stuff like that. It can just look a little bit messy, and for me, I find it sometimes hard to continue reading when I've got a whole bunch of last names and page numbers. It's easier for me to look down at a footnote, stuff like that, or ignore the footnotes altogether if I just want to read. So this is the easiest. Remember, Ms. Mastella, that if you give the source, right, Smith, page 15, you need to, Ms. Suda, give the source, right? Yes. Don't make that mistake. Some people forget. They get all their sources, they put in their, their citations and stuff, and then they forget to give a bibliography or a works cited page. So I'm like, okay, Smith, page 15, what? Of what? I've got no reference page to look at, so make sure you don't forget that. Join your references. I gave you some examples in the syllabus, some different examples, basic examples. Follow them. Okay? Don't get too complicated. Yeah, and I know it would be nice if they had a uniform standard for publishing books and different types of books, but they don't. They don't. I mean, publishing companies do it every different way. That's just the nature of the beast. The basic information you need to give is the author, the book title, okay, where it was published, who published it, when it was published. That's the basic. It could even be more basic than that, but that's the basic standard that almost every different style that you can do, whether it's Chicago or MLA or APA or whatever, is that it? That's it. The author, the book title, where it was published, who published it, when it was published. And then, if there's other information, like it's a different edition, like it's not the first edition, like it's the 7th edition, revised, which does not mean it's the same book. It means it's revised, right? They'll tell you it's revised. So stuff may have been taken out, corrections may have been made, chapters may have been added. So it's not the same book. And you have to indicate that. Or it's a volume. Let's say it's volume 2 of a 3-volume set. Smith wrote 3 volumes on Jesus. Jesus volume 1, Jesus volume 2, Jesus volume 3. You use Jesus volume 2. All right, so you don't have to worry about 1 or 3. You didn't use it, right? But you have to tell me which one you did use, because then I don't know which volume you're referring to. Say volume 2. Where do you stick this information? After the book title. All right? Author who wrote the book, the title of the book, and then that area in between the title of the book and where the book was published, New York, Philadelphia, wherever, that's typically the place you dump all the extra information like 7th edition revised, volume 2, all that kind of stuff. You understand? Good. Yes. God bless you.
I know you're talking about the reference stuff, but say, like, for the in-text citations, like, if you're getting it right from the Bible, I just put word.
Oh, yeah. Excellent question. Yeah. Number one, you don't have to cite the Bible and work cited. Obviously, you're using the Bible. It would be helpful if you told me which version you're using, which translation. And all you have to do is when you first start quoting from the Gospel of Mark, you put, you can put, or you can write it out, New American Bible Revised Edition. Just do that. There are abbreviations, but you probably wouldn't know a lot. So just write out New International Bible or version, King James version, whatever. Okay. And yes, you cite, as I think I went over in the first class about when you're reading the Bible, any of the books of the Bible, you have the name of the book, you give the chapter, and then the verse or verses, right? And so that's just how you do it. Simple, right? That's all you have to do. And then if you want to tell me what version it is, then after you give the chapter, the book, the chapter, the verse, comma, King James version, just so I know which translation. All right. Yeah, if you are referencing specific things from the gospel, yeah, always try to give the place where it is in the gospel, so I can check. Okay. It also demonstrates to me that you've done some other reading. You know where it is. Yeah, it's a proof that you know where it is. Articles. If any of you want to use articles in a journal, it's fine. It's a little bit different, but I give you an example in the syllabus that you can look at. The basic structure for citing an article is the author of the article, the title of the article, okay? Except with a book, you italicize the title. Okay? With an article or a chapter from a book, anything less than a book title, you put it in quotation marks. So if it's not a book title, it's quotation marks. Smith, my chapter in a book, comma, which is on quotation marks. The book title, my book, all right? Book titles are always in italics. And an article is, or a book chapter is in quotation marks. Then after the title of the article, the source, the journal, where was it written? Journal of Eggheads, Egghead Quarterly, No one will ever read this review, You're okay. Yeah, so you give the name of the journal. Then you give the volume numbers, where it gets a little bit tricky because it's not the same as a book. You have to give the volume of the journal, volume 27 or whatever. Then you give the date of the volume, 2026, and then you give the page numbers. So that's where it just gets a little veers off a little bit with a journal article. Okay, so it's still kind of the same as a book. Who wrote it? What's the name of it? Okay, and then kind of who published it. For a journal article, it's who wrote it, what's the name of it, where was it published, which journal. Okay, and then where can I find it in the journal? Because there are usually several editions of a journal put out in a year. So you need the volume number, you need to know the year, and you need to sort of know the page numbers. Okay, that's pretty much. I think those are the only examples I really give that I can think that you would need to use. The internet is difficult. Basically with the internet, you need to know. It's so difficult with the internet because sometimes you have no clue who the author is. The blog. And the person is using some kind of alias or handle. You don't know. You don't know who it is. You don't even know if it's their own work. They could just be copying and pasting someone else's thoughts that they thought were interesting. So they're, I have no clue. But, the internet, I would say make it simple on yourself. If you can find the author of the page, good. Person's name, again, in quotation marks, it's not a book. The name of, whatever the name of the page that you're on is. Don't worry about all the other stuff, that hovers above. Just what is the title of the actual page you're on? The website name, if you can find it. If you can, just give the website address, the complete website address. And that's probably the simplest way to do it. Okay? The rule of thumb, Mr. Cotillo, is the reader should be able to find the source, check what you're saying. So if I can't, if you want to give me something from the internet, which you don't have, you really shouldn't be, focus on the books in the library. But anyways, give me something from the internet, okay, fine. But if I can't follow the link and there's nothing there, or there's no link at all, you know, I might go on the internet to search for it to see where you might have gotten it from. Okay? But I'm a lazy man. You know, I'm 53 years old, Mr. Casper. Right? I don't have a lot of time left. I'd rather spend it with my cat. So is that going to affect your grade deleteriously? Yeah. You didn't need to tell me where it's from. Okay. So that's kind of the simplest way to do it. Regarding what you would call it. Oh yeah, the books in the library. Has anyone been to the library yet? Seen some of the books on reserve? Okay. As I say this in the syllabus, but I'll repeat it. I should just say read the syllabus, Ms. Arnold, right? But I'm not going to. Donald Trump is president with 1,000 flowers bloom. Until we all die in a nuclear holocaust. God willing, no. Anyways, what was I going to say? Or what was I saying? Oh, yeah. What do I say in the syllabus? 2 books or 3 books? 2 books or 3 books? What's in the syllabus? From the reserve? Yes, sir. 2. 2. Okay. Yeah, so look in the syllabus. Make sure you should know that. If you don't know it, look in the syllabus to find out. Because you have to use at least that amount of books that I want. If you don't, if you use, like I asked for 2 and you use 1, you're probably going to get a very low grade, maybe even hovering around failure. If you don't give me 2, you don't even give 2, use the reserve shelf at all. I don't care if you give me 10 other sources. You still do what the basic thing I asked. It's a straight failure. I'm not going to, it's an F. I'll still write comments. I'll still read it and write comments on it. But if you can't do just even that basic thing that I'm asking, you know, I don't care how many other sources you gave me from the internet or from journals or whatever. I'm asking you, these books are there, whatever. You do not have to read Ms. Neff, the whole books, okay? You know, be selective. Hopefully you've read the Gospel of Mark. Something stood out to you as stuff you could use, Mr. Walker, you know, in writing your paper, answering the questions. All right, look it up in the book. You know, does the author say something about this? And you should only use an author if you're to show a point, basically that you've already set out. Make your point. This is about you, Ms. Fletcher. I don't care if you're wrong, or if you're right. Maybe you're right, but maybe you're wrong. Maybe you got your information wrong. I don't care. Make your argument. You know, I think Mark this because it says here in chapters of a verse this is a. I think his new Jesus was this because it says here. Okay, I might completely. Well, I got another shoes. I have laundry anyways. Make your point. Okay, fine. And then you can throw in, oh, and by the way, you know, this biblical scholar agrees with me, agrees with how I'm arguing. It's supportive, okay? That still doesn't mean you're right, Mr. Smith, okay? Because you can build up a million arguments, but, you know, just because everyone agrees with you doesn't mean you're right. I mean, if you're some UFO cult, you know, and you're like, hey, I believe in UFOs. So do I! And everyone's hand goes up, so do we! Still doesn't mean that, you know, aerial phenomena really exist. They might. Okay, so there is a little bit of, BS in scholarship. It's not always perfectly logical. But it helps to show that, other people have thought about this too, like I have, and they've come independently to a same or similar conclusion. Right? That's like the scientific method in a way. You want to control it. And if nobody agrees with you, well, then you have a job to do. That's why people write books to show why I'm right and why the consensus among scholars is wrong. Right? That's what makes scholarship interesting because you want to prove your point. But if you think, that's how you should use your sources. Don't just look for something that said, Jesus worked miracles, so he was a miracle worker. That's how Mark presents it. Okay, fine. And then you give me a quote from some person's commentary on Zurschel that basically just says Jesus was a miracle worker. Okay, fine. That doesn't prove anything. It's just taking words that you just used. You know what I'm saying? Okay, don't fall into that trap. Don't just take something from your book that repeats what you said. Right? It should be supportive of your argument, Mr. Cloud. All right. So yeah, you don't have to read the whole book. Be selective. Okay. Don't kill yourself. I'm not asking you to read closely. This is an undergraduate course. This is not your major for most of you. I hope that it will be. I think that those of you, especially who are in the sciences, biology, radiology, I highly recommend doing a double major in philosophy because the sciences tell us how the world works. This is wearing green. Sciences are fantastic at telling us how the world works and giving us data, right, Mr. Walker? Data. That's what you want from experiments. Data, numbers, stuff to analyze, statistics, right? Those of you who are in social work, you have to take statistics, right? Or sports science, stuff like that. But the sciences are not very good at teaching you how to think, how to analyze. Okay, that's where philosophy comes in. Logic, how we think in our epistemology, the assumptions we make about things. Okay, and that's what philosophy is very good for. Not going to give you the answers to the universe, but it will teach you, Ms. Whalen, how to really think and parse out your thoughts. So I would really recommend that to any, because I've known many scientists. I listen to them, and they're brilliant men and women. And then they start making statements about stuff that maybe isn't so much of their field, like statements about the world, the way the world really is and the world works, or the existence of God or something like that. Base some argument off of whether God exists or not from some. And I'm like, no. It's a terrible argument. Pass. Stick with studying quasars, lady, Because they don't understand the other arguments. They don't understand. So anyway, I would mention that. So I know you're not doing this for a degree, so I understand that. So don't kill yourself when you're looking at the books. Make it easy on yourself. Cherry pick a few things that are interesting to you, but show that you've actually read it and you know and you can use it intelligently. Yes? Is there anything else? Any other questions or pretty much covered? A lot of this does pertain to other stuff that you write as well, not just this course. Okay. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll move on into Christian faith. Yes, the God of Jesus is a God of mercy, yes? He's a God of mercy. But I am not Ms. Beth. If you want mercy, go to the God of Israel. Well, at least the New Testament God. Don't forget about the Old Testament God. He's out of control. I am a harsh grader. I'm not gonna lie. I try to be generous, but I am a harsh grader. I expect, that you know how to write. You know how to compose a proper paper, and if you don't, you know how to learn to do it. You don't need me to teach you. That you know what you're doing. Okay. So be aware of that when you're writing. Because if you get to a point where you're like, I just want to get this over with, remember what I just said. Dr. Dunn's a harsh grader. And take another drink of coffee, Mr. Casper, or whatever floats your boat, Miss Fletcher. And I don't know, BBT, I don't know, chamomile, and get back to work, knowing that who's going to see it and what kind of grader he is. And I'm warning you already. Okay. All right. What are we talking about? Jesus, of course. Oh, da, da, da. Okay, Irish lady, stop singing. There you go. Where are we here? Bible, yes? On the Bible. Yes, the Bible. I want to write a book on the Bible, but I have a feeling that by the time I finish it, I'll have lost my faith. But, it happens. All right, let's see who's trying to interrupt me. Yeah, go away, Doc, all right? You have new test results from Scotland. Well, anyways. All right. So now I'm just going to talk about what are the divisions of the Christian Bible. We'll start first with the Jewish scriptures, which are called the Old Testament. Okay, and there are 4 divisions, essentially, traditionally. The Pentateuch, the historical books, the wisdom literature, or the wisdom books, and then finally the prophetical books. Start with Pentateuch. Pentateuch, as maybe we don't know. I don't know if I did it in this class. I did in world religions. Pente means 5. Pente means 5. A pentagram, a pentacle, right? A 5-pointed star, all right? And teuchos in Greek means a volume, or like a hinge, literally. So the 5 volumes is kind of literally what Pentateuch means. Jews don't call it the Pentateuch. That's a Christian term. They call it Torah, or another word is Chumash. Chumash. Which this word Chumash in Hebrew kind of makes it, from what I understand, means like the same thing as Pentateuch in a way. Volumes, not scrolls. Because typically the scriptures of Judaism are written, there it is, are written as scrolls, not as books. Okay, you go to a synagogue and they bring out the Torah. They don't bring out a book. They bring out a scroll, and that's what it has to be. It can't be a book even. It has to be a scroll. Why? Tradition, oral tradition. How it has to be. But if you go to a Christian church, Catholic church, Eastern Orthodox, Eastern Catholic, there's a procession, right? The book of the Gospels is taken up off the altar, and should be. The early church, it was a real procession. They processed with the Gospels throughout the crowd of people in the church. Nowadays, the church priest or deacon just kind of like goes boom, 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 that's about it, But in a synagogue, when the Torah is taken out, the Torah is wrapped in special fine cloth. People touch it and bless themselves. We also do that in my church. When the priest brings the gospel book out into the crowd, it doesn't happen that often. He'll touch the gospel book and make the sign of the cross, just like James touching the Torah, showing reverence. But it's a book. It's a book. It's not a scroll. That's interesting in the development of Christianity. Well, anyways, I just mentioned it. Okay, so the Torah, the 5 scrolls, the 5 volumes, also called the Law of Moses. Why? Because a lot of it is laws and rules. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And the traditional belief is that it was all given to this man Moses, what I mentioned before, during the Exodus, or written by him directly. Okay? So these first 5 books, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Okay? There's not really much law in Genesis. The laws per se are really in these books, from about halfway through the book of Exodus all the way to the end of the book of Deuteronomy. And actually, the book of Deuteronomy it's the Deuteros Nomos. Yes, it's the second law. It's kind of a repeat of a lot of the material that's found in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, a later repeat. Genesis has some things like circumcision, cutting the foreskin off the penis of a boy or a man to become a Jew. Well, because they are a Jew, I shouldn't say it makes you a Jew, but it indicates you're part of the people of Israel. That comes from Genesis, but that might have been inserted later by somebody. Who knows? Anyway. Okay. And, we can. The traditional view is that Moses wrote all of it. All right. That's a traditional view. I mean, it doesn't. If I get up to heaven, Mr. Cotillo, and I get to the pearly gates, Moses comes out to me with big, heavy metal hair, long beard. How you doing? Yeah, Moses, you wrote all those books, right? Well, let me tell you something. Not really. I didn't write. Okay. Well, I thought that you wrote all of them. No, I didn't write all. Some of them, a little bit, but obviously I couldn't write about my own death, and where I was buried. Think about that. Oh yeah, that makes sense, Mo. And I wasn't there at the beginning of the world when God created the universe, so I couldn't really be like a reporter there. I wasn't there when Adam was, because Adam and Eve were the first, right? So could have been there too. I had to come later. Yeah, Mo, that makes sense. But some parts were by me, if it matters. Oh, okay, great. All right, so I was wrong for all of you. Okay, I understand. I just have one question. Really one question. What's my question? Does anyone know what my question will be, Ms. Harrison? To Moses? No? Not yet? You can take this next to Mo, I just want to know one thing. Could you point me in the direction of the Indian buffet? Oh, that's all I want to know. Just point me in the direction where the Indian food is in heaven. That's all I care. All right, so I was wrong. You didn't write the Pentateuch. But I thought you did. I hoped you did. I shouldn't say it this way. I hoped. What Moses told me. Okay, fine. Where's the Indian food? No, I mean, if you want to believe one or the other, I don't think it's pertinent to, I'm not going to argue either way. I don't know why it would matter necessarily if this man Moses wrote down the words of the Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy all by himself or mostly by himself. Great, that's fine. If it's a compilation of traditions about Moses, maybe some of which do come from Moses personally, but others that come later, I don't see the problem. Does it make it not inspired? It's not the word of God anymore, because Moses didn't write down the story of Adam and Eve or God creating the world in 6 days. Do we rip that out of the Bible because we can't establish that it's directly from Moses? I don't see. To me, it's well. Anyway, but if you want to believe it, that's fine. I tend not to, but the church doesn't. The church is not like The church is not like everything. It's like one size fits all. Okay, the church has never stated who wrote the Pentateuch or any of the books of the Bible. Scholars are free to debate and discuss and disagree. Okay, what they can't disagree on is that they're inspired, they're motivated by God the Holy Spirit. Okay, that whoever wrote them or whichever group of people wrote them, okay, and compiled them, edited them, did so under the motivation of God. Okay, it wasn't just a purely human product. Yes, that's the ascent. That's what the church cares about. Okay, the theology, but the historical aspect, yeah, investigate. Learn the languages, do archaeology, see what's going on. All right, you find out that maybe a traditional view that people held was not really true. They just held it, right? Everyone believed that Moses wrote this. All right, might be true. Personally, I think the evidence tends to, well, not necessarily say no. In some cases, I would say no, like Moses writing about his own death and burial. But God could have given him a vision. You know, I've heard people argue that God gave him a vision of the 6 days of creation. Yes, Mr. Heisler, right? That's possible in my worldview. So, okay. Then we have the historical books. Yes, histories. And these are, when we say history, um, yeah, there's an historical outlook to some of the books. They're trying to tell the history of Israel, but it's not history in the sense that we have modern history. Okay, these are in the sense of ancient history, and ancient historians wrote things quite differently. And you just have to be aware of that because people get shook and shocked and worried, you know, when they find out that, oh, yeah, the Bible writes history like people were writing history 3,000, 2,000 years ago. You know, it's only in modern times, beginning around the 1600s, with modernity, the historical period of modernity, and modern sciences, that people became very attuned to, you want to get the facts, and you want history means elucidating, digging out the facts of what happened and who said what and how they said it and how they originally said it, right? And also the assumption that if we can't establish like 1, 2, 3, 4 how things happened, or so and so said this, then it didn't happen, right? It's false. It's not true because we can't establish it historically through the methods of historical criticism, right? That's kind of like how, at least that's how I've been brought up to think. So it's kind of like a lie. They've been lying to us since high school. Take one example. Why did we write the U.S. Constitution? Well, we're near Philadelphia, right? Did the founding fathers meet in Philadelphia to write the U.S. Constitution? Does anybody know? Does anyone remember from high school? Because you probably weren't taught history in high school. Certainly not in grade school. It's a wonderful book by an historian called Lies My Teacher Told Me. Right? Lies My History Teacher Told Me. It goes through all sorts of stuff. It shows how the textbooks package history for us, especially American history, because the purpose is not historical study in Venezuela is to create good citizens, good Americans, to understand how the system works, democracy, checks and balances, equality, etc., and so forth. A little bit of slavery here and there, but won't mention that too much. So if you found out that a lot of the facts that you were told about why things happen could not really be historically verified, or we do have historical evidence, but it kind of contradicts. It's not exactly the story that people think. Is it all a lie? Now we live in the age of postmodernism. We're actually post-modernity now. said postmodernists are saying, yeah, everything's a narrative. You hear this all the time, like on television. Watch some comedy channel, watch the Daily Show, or political stuff. Well, that's all. Their narrative. They got their spin. There is no true story anymore. That's a lie in itself. Then the historian can actually establish what happened in the past with a reasonable degree of certainty. That's not possible in postmodernist thought. Nor the science, even science. I know everyone's big on science these days, but a lot of people aren't. Science is not objective. I know what you've been taught in your science classes, chemistry, biology. You know, you get the same this in the beaker and that in the beaker, you get the same result, right? Chemicals react, right? And they react in your beaker just as they're going to react in someone's beaker over the classroom in China, right? No different. Yeah. Well, why are you doing those experiments? What's your purpose? Who taught you how to do those experiments? Did the scientific method arise from a God? God came down from heaven and saw aliens and said, hey, this is how you experiment. Or did it come from human beings of a certain culture? And why did they do it? This is no one asked them. Anyone taking philosophy with Professor Cluis or Dr. Messina? Yes? No? Maybe you should. See, the scientific results are tainted. They're not objective. They represent the biases of the investigator, the experimenter. Not the world I was born into, but it's now your world. So let's bring it back to the Bible. If I find out these are history books, they're called histories. You know, like the books of First and Second Samuel, First and Second Kings, which talk about the kingdom of Israel. Other stuff, the books of Maccabees and stuff like that. All right, but they're written in a certain way. Okay, it's more storytelling than history telling. Although historian reads simply as a story. That's really a good historian. That's what you do, right? So you're telling a story. You know, what's the story I want to tell? Okay, the story that they want to tell in the Bible is God's relationship with His people. Keep that in mind. If there are legitimate historical details in the mix, which there are a lot of them in the Bible, more than people tell you. I find that interesting. I find it fascinating. But it doesn't make the Bible inspired scripture for me. It doesn't mean that God motivated the Bible. It's a different question than whether whoever wrote the book of Nehemiah, got every fact right. Well, if God's inspiring, shouldn't every fact be right? Doesn't God know history? Yes, God knows history. God knows everything. Obviously. He knows the past. He certainly knows the future. But the person who wrote the book of Nehemiah, Mr. Casper, didn't. Then we have wisdom books, wisdom literature. What is wisdom? Basically, wisdom is like ethics, Ms. Neff. Another word kind of like for ethics, human flourishing. Okay? And all cultures have this stuff. There's nothing unique to the Bible about it. It just developed within Judaism. But it's all sorts of surrounding cultures in the Middle East, had wisdom literature, and other religions and other cultures have wisdom literature, where people try to describe, usually with short, pithy statements, like an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and stuff like that. How to live the good life, So specialized knowledge about ethics, what to do. Don't talk too much, but listen a lot, stuff like that. The book of Sirach is beautiful for this. It's a jumble. The book of Sirach is a jumble of stuff. It's not, you can't really make any kind of organization to it. It's almost like the guy was like doing free, when you do like poetry, and it's like, what do they call it? Free thought? No, that's not free thought. Not free form. It's the word. But you know what I mean. just kind of writing what's coming to you. So the person who wrote Sirach, actually we know who wrote Sirach, a man named Jesus ben Sirach. Not Jesus. Jesus is a common name. It's Jews. This guy Jesus ben Sirach, because he identifies himself at the end of the book as the author. It's the only biblical book that we know who actually wrote it or supposedly wrote it. Yeah, he talks about this, that, and the other, how you should act when you're out with friends at a dinner, what kind of wife you should look for, what kind of professions are good ones, what are bad ones, et cetera and so forth. And he throws in stuff about God and stuff like that. It's human flourishing. What knowledge, riton in English, to know something. What knowledge helps us to flourish? What's the difference with the Jewish wisdom books is that God is usually the focus. The first rule for the Jew is that one's relationship with God, especially in following his Torah in the Pentateuch. Okay, that's usually what they're pointing back to. And then finally we have prophets. We have these men and women, but we have no books from women, but there are prophetesses who are mentioned in the historical books, but we don't have any writings from them, probably for obvious cultural reasons. We probably weren't taught how to write, but whatever. But a person who speaks on behalf of God about things that are going on, and also sometimes about things in the future. Okay? I include both in my definition, just to kind of stick to modern biblical scholars. I'm a naughty man. Well, no, because the traditional view, again, when we get into the traditional consensus, a lot of people just presume that a prophet was someone who predicted the future, like a palm reader or something like that. No, the function of a prophet was to reveal the will of God primarily, okay? And it could be in the now. Usually it was in the now. You consult a prophet for the prophet to consult God for you, okay? And the prophet, this happened in a variety of ways. Prophets would go into trances where they throw bones on the ground and interpret the bones, stuff like that. Yes, even in Israel. Sorry, it's mentioned in the Bible. Anyways, and then it would determine, what message Yahweh is giving. But there are also prophets who would predict the future and say, this is what Yahweh is going to do in the future. And when it happens, as I say it will happen, then you'll know that my prophecy was true. So it's kind of like proof when it does happen that the person was a true prophet. Because anyone can say after the fact, Barack Obama is going to be president of the United States. Well, he already was, right? But if I, go back, 20 years in the past and I write in my diary like a little marginal note, some mixed race dude, black and white from Hawaii will become president. Oh, wow. Like a prophet, he predicted the future. No, that's a prophecy after the fact. It's already happened. But maybe, I saw it. I could intuit it, I write about it. No, the prophets, if they're legitimate prophets, what they say about the future, the fact that it comes true shows that they're not just saying it after the fact. Okay, it's proof of the legitimacy of their message. And so we have a bunch of books of prophets. I'll just add this about the prophets. Most of the times, well, all of the times I should say, because I can't think of one book of the prophets where there's none of the prophets. Yeah, so I don't think I'm wrong here. None of the prophets was appreciated. People did not like the prophets. And all I have to do is read them, because if God sends a prophet to Israel, it is almost always because Israel is doing something wrong. Something is ticking God off, usually worshiping other gods and not worshiping the one God properly. But also social injustice is a big one with the God of Israel, with Yahweh. That you're oppressing people who are, who can't fight for themselves, like widows or orphans, aliens, not aliens like Klingons, but people who are residing amongst you but are not really part of your community. they're refugees from the war, or they just moved because there was a famine where they were living and they moved into your area because you didn't have a famine and you're treating them like dirt. So the Jewish God is big on social justice. Follow my law. So people usually hated the prophets, didn't like the prophets. Read Isaiah, read Jeremiah, Ezekiel. They didn't like the prophets, and they didn't usually listen to them. The prophet Ezekiel was one of the prophets during the exile. Remember the exile in Wailing? Yes, in Babylon. He's the only prophet we have who was an exilic prophet. He was not prophesying in the land of Israel. He was a prophet in Iraq, ancient Iraq. That's where the book of Ezekiel comes from, this man Ezekiel. I don't even know if he ever saw the land of Israel, but he was a prophet. And he's got some really nasty, he compares, you want to read some nastiness, read Ezekiel. Compares the Jews, the Israelites to, like a hooker who spreads her legs open so you can see her stuff, her junk, and sleeps with anybody that comes by. And the people, God tells Ezekiel, the people will come to you, oh, prophet, prophet, tell us a word from Yahweh. Tell us a word from Yahweh. But Ezekiel, I will give you a word for them. But they will not listen to you, Ezekiel. They will not do what you tell them to do. However, when the things that I predict through you happen, they will know that a prophet has been amongst them. So even in the exile, when it had all been destroyed and they were exiled and enslaved, people were still kind of they didn't want to do what God wanted them to do, but God still sent Ezekiel to tell them what they needed to do so that later, when later generations would think on their situation, they'll be like, oh yeah, we really should have been doing what God asked us to do. Yes, yes, yes. I got 2 minutes, but that's all right. I guess I'll see you on Thursday. On that positive, happy St. Patrick's Day. Faith and Bavora. Erin go bra. All right. Have a good day. I'll see you on Thursday. You're welcome, sir. Have a good day. Have a good day. See you on Thursday. Let's see here. All right. Have a good day, miss. 19. All right. Excuse me. I should be on Christian. Have a good day. Ah. All right. What is this? Have a good day, gentlemen. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir. Have a good day. Hello, sir. Third. Let's see here. Yep. Okay. Alright, what we got here? Maybe. Not really. Not here. No. No. Yes. Yes. Mention her, yes. Harrison, Jasper. No. I don't know if I really. I think I did. And Smith. Okay. Mhm. Hello, miss.
I will.
Hello, miss. Hello, miss.